We've got a brilliant panel today. If I'm just going to introduce them one by one. To my right is Rio Ferdinand. He's a BT Sport pundit now, but he had a stellar football career with West Ham, Leeds United, Manchester United and Queen's Park Rangers. At United he won 6 Premier Leagues, 1 Champions League, 3 League Cups. He's been capped 81 times for England, picked in 4 World Cup squads, and they even made him captain for a while. To his right is David Gold. David is the joint chairman of West Ham United. They played their last game at Upton Park, the Berlin ground, last night. You may have read about it in the newspapers this morning. David has overseen with his fellow chairman David Sullivan a real turnaround in West Ham's fortunes. They are currently 6th in the Premier League. They are well established as a big force in English football and move into the Olympic Stadium next season. He is a lifelong West Ham fan. He grew up in Green Street, and in his professional career outside football, he is the chairman of the Ann Summers Group. And finally, we have Steve Parish, who is the co-chairman of Crystal Palace, another lifelong fan of his club. Steve was very successful in the advertising industry. He built Tag Worldwide into a company of 2,500 employees in 13 countries. He has also transformed his club. Him and his fellow investors bought them out of administration in 2010. Again, they are established as a major Premier League side now. They're in the FA Cup final, and I'm sure all 3 of these gentlemen are going to offer us a great insight into the globalisation of the Premier League. Ria, I'd like to start with you. We mentioned earlier it's 20 years to the month since your professional debut as a footballer for West Ham. It's a difficult question, but in terms of the game that you walked into as a teenage prodigy to the one that you finished up at in your last couple of years at United and then QPR, how has that globalisation changed the way you lived your life as a footballer, the way you were perceived?
I think firstly I'd say, other than the alcohol intake, which drastically dwindled as I kind of went through my career. But social media is a huge part. We saw yesterday, I think, with the game we were talking before, some pieces come out before the game with all of the stuff being thrown at the bus, came out mid-first half. And that's just that's something that would have been reported about the next day probably, if not maybe the day after. So the speed with which information can be kind of put into the public domain is crazy nowadays, and you're not only talking locally, and normally it would have been the local paper and then the nationals, and that was it really. It wouldn't really spread any further, but now with a push of a button it's going worldwide and it becomes worldwide news instantly. So that's a big difference, and for a footballer to have to understand that and realise the responsibility that comes with that is huge, and I'm sure a lot of clubs are now investing in people to kind of coach and teach the younger generation of how to deal with social media. I mean, I was kind of I learnt by errors really, and made mistakes along the way to kind of grasp how it was used and how it was used for the benefit of myself and the club. But that's a big part of it. The sports science as well is a huge part that's changed. I remember players when I come through at West Ham who would get injured and immediately go down the pub, and then part of their rehab involved a couple of pints of Guinness because it had iron in it. It was worth it. It was good. So that was the way they used to get around the physiotherapy department. But whereas now, and I used to have to drive because I was the kid. So but now obviously it's such a huge part of the club, and the investment that the clubs are having to put into the sports science area is huge. And even just going into, when I walked into Manchester United the first year, a PR day, a commercial day was ball signing on a Thursday, a few shirts, 20 balls, 50 balls, and that was it for the sponsors. By the time I left, it was the whole training ground would turn into a commercial compound where all of the sponsors, 50 plus sponsors, would come to the training ground. You'd have stations all around the training ground, and the players would do 4 hours after training on the Thursday. And that's in your contract in the small print that we later found out through David Gill. So when we tried to fight it, yeah. So that was a big change. And as I said, as players, especially when you get a little bit more experience, it's all about your recovery and your preparation for games and around training. And I was saying, like, I can't be sitting around for 3 hours flying around a training ground doing commercial things. And the older guys went to David Gill and said, listen, this is too much, what's going on? And he said, well, if you look in your small print of your contract and any new players that sign, it's in the contract, so you have to do it. And part of if you guys want to be paid that money, you have to do these type of things. So we quickly understood.
So Rio played at arguably the biggest name in British sport at Manchester United. West Ham are about to move into a brand new 60,000 capacity stadium, and you're going on tour to the United States this summer. I mean, in the recent past, a tour to the United States would really have been the preserve of United, Liverpool, but now West Ham are doing it. So what's changed?
Well, I think that there's no doubt that the English Premier League, and I can remember saying this 12, 14 years ago, that the Premier League is the greatest league the world has ever known. And I can remember a few people smiling or giggling at that. But in actual fact, that's what's happened. The Premier League has become the greatest league the world has ever known. It's generating huge sums of money. Popularity is growing throughout the world. And it's exciting times. But you've got to keep pace. You've got competitors, and therefore that's why one of the reasons that we'd be going to America, because we want to grow the fan base. Because in the past, your fan base was local. Then it spread out around the country, and now it's spreading around the world. And again, we were talking about Twitter. I've got fans from around the world that are fans of West Ham United. I mean, that was not even known 10, 15 years ago. We didn't realise we had fans in New Zealand, or that we had fans out in Mongolia or somewhere incredible. So, this is an amazing league, hugely popular, growing, surprising a lot of people, I have to say. And I would say, from West Ham's point of view, long may it last. But it is important that we don't allow, and you're right to say that if you go back only 10 years ago, it would only be the big clubs that could go on tour. Nobody would want to see Swansea or, dare I say it, West Ham. And now they do, because of this globalisation. Clubs are now, and even Leicester, that I think have been an amazing, it's been an amazing adventure for them. And I think we're all thrilled for them. I would say, almost to a man in this room, we're all, and ladies in this room, that we're all thrilled that Leicester have achieved what they've achieved. And it's given everybody hope. Everybody now can believe that a club like Burnley, coming up from the lower divisions into the Premier League, now believe that they can achieve these great heights of winning the league. I don't think it will happen again for 20 years, but nevertheless, it will give people hope.
Thank you, Steve. As a man with an advertising background, how do you analyse the great success of the Premier League, and also from the point of view of your own club, which is not one of the great global names but has a very strong local identity? How do you make that work to your benefit globally?
I mean, the league, as David said, is just a phenomenon, and you don't realise what it's like until you get into it. I mean, as far as touring goes, when I bought the club, we went to Exeter, and it all got rained off, so we came back and played like Brentford or someone. So it's a huge change.
And you're going to America this
We're going to America and Canada, hopefully, yeah. So went to South Africa last year, which was incredible. So, and as David said, you start to understand. We had 48,000 Facebook likes in the championship, and we've just passed 1 million. And you pick up 10, 15,000 a week. In terms of the league itself, I think there's a huge debt, an extraordinary debt to the Ken Bates and the Ron Nodes and the people that were in the league at the time that it was formed, because they did one thing which isn't true of any other league, really, any other major league, is they made it competitive with the distribution of the money. Now, when you look at global popularity, really as a league, we still kind of ride on the coattails of these guys, of Man United, Liverpool. These are massive clubs and massive names. And it would have been easy for them at the time to say, well, we're the big names, we're the ones people want to watch, we need all the money. You know, even in Germany, where they talk about this great egalitarian league that's for the fans, Bayern Munich get 3.5 times what the bottom club get when they win the league, which makes them virtually unassailable every year. And it's the same, of course, in Spain and in Italy. Gino of Watford, Gino Pozzo, who had Udinese for years, punching above their weight, getting into the Champions League, he basically bought an English club because he said the most TV revenue I can get is around 40 million against, say, AC Milan's 180, because they distribute it based on your history and what you've won and the gates that you get in the stadium. So we've got a much more level playing field, and of course that's driven through the fact that we had an empire and we've got all of these pockets of the world that are engaged and Anglophile and expats. But the competitive nature of the league really is what's driven it, and the Leicester phenomenon this year is great because it cements that. You know, people want to watch unpredictability. Richard Scudamore calls it unscripted drama, which is basically what the Premier League is. You know, they want to sit down not knowing what's going to happen. And that's not true when Real Madrid play Levante, you know, because it's 9-0. So that's what's incredible, that those guys then had the foresight to put something in place, and then latterly Richard and the guys at the league and all of the clubs, because it's a very sensible table we set out, isn't it, David? You know, where the good of the league comes before everything, have nurtured it and driven it to what it is. And I think we're only just seeing the beginning, honestly. I think we talk about 10 million a game, which is what we've got now. I mean, how many people at £1 a game could you get for Man United, Liverpool, if they were going for the title? 400, 500 million people would pay £1 a game globally to watch it. So, you know, I don't think we're anywhere close to the amount of money that this league can create in terms of income into it.
Rio, when you signed for Manchester United in 2002, in that famous white suit at Old Trafford,
Still got it.
should put it on today. It felt like, I remember that day, and it felt like, and it was, you were a British record transfer then, and it felt like players are never going to earn as much or go for as much. But we've talked about what it's like for the clubs in this new global era. What potential is there for players to become almost institutions on their own?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I remember me and Nemanja Vidic used to sit in the steam room together. I mean, that sounds a bit funny, but it was purely like rehabilitation and stuff like that, but recovery. But we used to sit there and say like, and look at City and look at some of the players that were going through their doors, and we were saying they're bang average players, some of them, and they're earning like double what we'd be earning, and we'd be sitting there going, but there would have been someone 5 years before saying the same thing about us. And it was always ask the question, do you reckon it's going to keep going? And I was the one going, this is limits, we're here, and here we are today, which was saying Raheem Sterling's an unproven talent really, £50 million player on, I don't know, £150,000 a week and rising. I mean, it's phenomenal. So it's definitely, I think it's going to keep going through, as Steve said before, keep going on and on in terms of the financial gain that players and clubs can make. But I remember when I signed for Manchester United, it was nothing to do with like a commercial kind of thinking as a player. You just went in and thought, I want to win things. I want to leave. I said in that press conference, I want to leave this club walking out my head held high, and I've added something to the history of the club, and that would mean winning. And luckily I could do that, but also what became part of that was you could become almost like a media company yourself. And I think I grasped that quite quickly. As soon as I heard about Twitter from some different sportsmen in America, I quickly understood that that's being able to tap into a market, that's being able to talk to fans, and you could almost shape yourself a bit better. Because I used to think to myself, there was someone in an office somewhere, like you probably, who had a certain perception of me. I thought, this is what I think he's like, and I want to make everybody else think he's like that through articles that I write about him that will shape my personality in the media and in the public domain. And I didn't like that. And so when I found Twitter, I thought this is the perfect platform for me to be able to tell people and show people this is me. And I started it, and a lot of the lads in the dressing room, what are you doing that for? You're just busy chatting to people, what's that about? And I always looked at it as more of a tool to speak to fans, but also a tool that when I leave the game, I'll leave with a briefcase of people that I can speak to at the end of my career, who I'll be able to maybe have some form of conversation, stroke business with. And that's what it's become like. When you see players now, when an advertising company or a Nike or Adidas speak to a particular player, one of the first questions they're asking now is, how many social media followers has he got? It's a big part of it now. I'm sure there's some clubs, Manchester United, they bought Shinji Kagawa. They bought Jisung Park. Now, for me, fantastic footballers, but 100% behind that as well would have been a factor of they're from Asia. That's a market we want to get into. And it's no coincidence that after them Jisung Park was signed, we went to Asia more than we went to anywhere else. And because that's a market of huge numbers, huge volume, huge money. So, as I said, we quickly started to understand as players that this is part of it. This is a big part of what we do.
David, have you found that in signing players? I mean, you've had tremendous success this season with the players you've got. Do you find that the players are more kind of atomised now? They're more like little corporations in their own right?
I think the best example of that is a couple of years ago, we toured New Zealand, which is a long way away. I can promise you it was an awesome trip. But what was incredibly surprising, we have a young man, Winston Reid, who is the New Zealand international, and he's like the young star of the team. In fact, he's probably the best player in the New Zealand team. When we got there, the amount of West Ham fans were staggering compared, dare I say it, you would have thought that Manchester United would be the dominant fan base almost anywhere in the world. West Ham there were more West Ham fans in New Zealand. I'm sure that you're not going to absolutely agree with this, but that's what we learnt from the statistics coming out, that we were the most, and it was all because of Winston Reid. Lots of young fans were supporting West Ham simply because we brought in Winston Reid. So I can understand why clubs would begin to think, maybe if we bring in a player from a certain country, then that would increase their supporter base and their fan base abroad, and that's getting back to globalisation.
Steve, you had a real coup when you signed Johan Cabaye, and he was regarded as a player who ordinarily would have been out of Palace's reach. How do you go about selling, a French international? He's at Paris Saint-Germain. How do you sell Crystal Palace to someone like that?
Well, I didn't take him to the stadium.
Wise move.
Or show him the delights of Crystal Palace. Although it's a nice place now, Crystal Palace. No, it's Crystal Palace is a nice place. It's not quite Paris, though. I think, listen, interestingly, when Rio was at Manchester United, it was a very obviously well-run club from top to bottom, and people knew their place in it. I think for some players now, they go to the bigger clubs or the moneyed clubs, and sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. It's not the experience they envisage, particularly if they want to play. They want to play all the time, and they're signing new global stars every day to get the PR and that kind of thing. So he loved the Premier League, he loved the competitiveness and the edge of it and the physicality of it. So, and obviously he liked Alan, so it was a bit of a unique situation. But, primarily, make no mistake, you can pay. That's the bottom line, and footballers even now will look at everything in the round. Obviously they want to come and they want to do well, have a chance of winning things, and of course Johan has. We're in the cup final, so he made a good footballing decision. He liked Alan. They'd finished fifth in the league with Newcastle, but we have incredible buying power. Our overseas rights alone are worth everybody else's overseas TV rights put together, and in that I include the NFL and the NBA and the baseball. So we do have extraordinary buying power, and if you can get the right circumstance and people think they're coming to the right environment for their career, you can tick the box with the number. So it makes a huge amount of difference.
Rio, when you talk about, it's interesting your point that you made about your sort of briefcase of, your followers, your social media imprint. But lots of players like you who come to the end of your careers, you have a wealth of choices now. I mean, could you see maybe when your children are older, could you see yourself playing abroad, managing abroad or kind of doing that? I mean, with new leagues in China and the MLS, I mean, on the back of the kind of reputation that you built at the Premier League?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I mean, when I was probably about 27, 28, I started thinking about the end game really and having avenues to go down. So setting things in place to be able to go and be comfortable going into maybe one or two or three things.
Yeah.
And football being a core part of that. But yeah, the globalisation of the game definitely allows you to be open your mind and open your eyes to look as far as India, where some people have been, David James for instance, and different parts of Asia, and obviously Europe and even America. But yeah, I mean that credit has to go to the Premier League. The Barclays Premier League as a brand itself has done an unbelievable job and has given all the players the opportunity to be able to go out to these places and earn vast amount of money, even more than what we do over here. So yeah, but myself, I don't know, I look at it now and sometimes it baffles me when you see some of these guys who are in their prime at 26 years old or even before that at 21, 22 on their way up to the top of the mountain in terms of success, and I deem success as being trophies and playing in the best leagues in the world, and they get an offer from one of these countries where all the money is and they go. I can't understand it. I mean, as I said, I could have had all the money in the world offered to me to go to play in Timbuktu, but if it didn't mean I could win the Premier League or the Champions League or FA Cup or League Cup or one of the leagues in Italy, Spain or Germany, I wouldn't have even turned my head. So I think it comes down again to the person as well. I think Kabay is a good example. He was at Paris Saint-Germain earning great money, a glamour club, great city, but he had an opportunity to get good money, I'm sure, at Crystal Palace, but I think one of the driving factors would have been play games. And as I said, the more people there are, more players there are like that out there, the better it is for the game for me.
And David, you've sold West Ham 52,000 season tickets for your new stadium, which is, I think, is comparable with any club's sort of core season ticket sale. I don't know if you've been able to look at the profile of the people who've bought those season tickets, but where are you getting all these new season ticket holders from? Are they people who are moving to London from abroad? I mean, do you have any idea of what your sort of demographic is?
Well, I think that West Ham United, the bowling ground, Upton Park, when it was built, we didn't have cars. We used to have horse and carts and things. So, they've built a stadium in the wrong place, but at the time it was right. It's now wrong that the access to the football club is virtually impossible.
We saw that yesterday.
Yeah, you saw that. It's right. I mean, yesterday, as you saw, the fans brought the East End of London to a standstill. It was gridlocked for miles and miles and miles around, and that was simply because instead of having the normal 35,000 fans coming to our football club, we probably had 35,000 coming to watch the game and another 20,000 just to be there. Well, of course, that then gives you, could you do the sums for me on that? That's 35 and 20, that's 55,000. 55,000, which we'll be taking to the new stadium. But they were there yesterday just for the event, and they brought the East End of London to a standstill. So it tells you everything. Nobody would want to come to watch a match if it's going to take them 2 hours to get there and 2 hours to get home, or 3 hours, or whatever it might be. So when we moved to the Olympic Stadium, oh, by the way, Upton Park Station is like 150 years old, and it looks it. It's an absolute, I mean, they close it half the time because of health and safety. So you can imagine, and a lot of fans have said over the years, we want to stay at Upton Park, and to be honest, I was one of them. But to stay, and oh, by the way, and stay and expand and develop Upton Park. Upton Park has been developed over the years to get to 35,000, to bring in more fans. Nobody's going to agree to it. You know, transport aren't to agree, the council's not going to agree. So there's absolutely no chance of developing West Ham beyond 35,000. So after we had a discussion with Barry Hearn, who agreed that we could go to the Olympic Stadium, that's where we're going in August. And it'll be a 60,000 seater stadium. But the main reason, your question was, you know, where do these fans come from? Well, they've always been there. It's just that they can't get to Upton Park. And now they can get to the Olympic Stadium. Upton Park has one train station which closes half the time. Stratford has 5 train stations and 13 train lines. So, you know, that's made the difference. People can be at Stratford from Ashford in 20 minutes. It's just a game-changing situation and a great opportunity for West Ham. And it's a good opportunity for the taxpayer as well. I'm delighted to share with you.
Before we open it up to questions, I just want to ask you, Steve, on the topic of globalisation, you sold a stake in your club to American investors Josh Harris and David Blitzer, who own the Philadelphia 76ers in the NBA and the New Jersey Devils in the NHL. Can you summarise why 2 American sports sort of investors would come to South London with respect to Palace and what they saw in your club?
Well, the Premier League, the NBC have done a fantastic job. Again, another smart move of the Premier League in the States was to take it off cable, off pay-per-view effectively, and put it onto terrestrial television. And they'd noticed that NBC really invested in sport. When they took a sport on, you know, they didn't just show it and get a couple of commentators. You know, they built proper studios. They got to the bottom of the game. So that's grown. I mean, now Premier League football in the US gets the same sort of crowds as a hockey game, a regular season ice hockey game, which is a big sport out there. And it's growing all the time. And of course, soccer generally, you know, when you look at the lexicon of American sports, you have to be careful, but they're kind of silly, their games, aren't they? You know, they're very they are though, aren't they? Like, you know, you can't really play American football with your mates. You know, it's you can't. You know, so I think, you know, soccer resonates with young people there, but they never really had a professional league that was of the standard that they could all get behind. So obviously, Josh and David and everybody else out there have kind of picked a club. We came along in the Premier League at a very fortuitous moment, which was the first year that the NBC had it. So it's kind of a great con, really. Nobody in America knows us as anything other than a Premier League. We've managed to get rid of the other 100 years and just focus on the last 4. So don't tell them. So and then, of course, the problem that I had is that unfortunately the government wouldn't give me a stadium. I did ask them if they would. And because I'm still trying to get to the bit where a 750 million stadium for 15 million quid is a good deal for a taxpayer. But you know, I'm very happy for you because I would have taken it myself. So I can't. I'm only jealous, really, David. You know. So. Unfortunately, we've had 110 years of underinvestment. I have actually got a picture. If you go online and you search Selhurst Park 1924 and go into images on Google, you'll find a picture of our main stand as it currently is, on its own, basically. It is completely unchanged since 1924, the main stand. So, and it's of no architectural significance either. So, you know, there's a lot to be done. You know, these guys have obviously got a 35,000 seat stadium, decent stadium, Upton Park. You know, it's not a bad stadium at all, even by Premier League standards now as a facility. And we haven't, and we've got to even to try and get to there, let alone the fact that they're going to their 60,000 seater and obviously Arsenal been in the Emirates, etc. So it's going to take a lot of money. So broadening the investor base was a good idea, and they're good guys, they've got a good knowledge of sport. They're good fun, so hopefully together, you know, we can do that, and we can catch up with these guys a little bit.
Great, thank you. Have we got any questions? Yes, so the gentleman up there.
Ralph Turner from Four Communications. You spoke quite a lot about the tours to Asia and to the States and to New Zealand. One of the questions is, how do you ensure the balance between getting the commercial benefits of that, but also making sure that the team, often pre-season tours, are prepared to be as competitive as possible, and how important is getting that balance right?
Rio, I mean, that might be a good one for you to start with, because we talked earlier, you started when it was just, a trip to Ireland or something like that, and by the time you finished, you were going all over the world with United. So how does it shape up?
Yeah, I mean, for a player, it is draining, because obviously you're back into pre-season. You normally do a week here in England at the club, which is like a bit of a base, and then you go away for 2.5 weeks on the tour, and every day you're doing double sessions, playing games, and obviously the different time zones, you're shattered. But within that, you've got all the commercial deals that are in place that have to be facilitated by the players in terms of appearances. So it is a very tiring trip, and I think Sir Alex Ferguson, he's always had a gripe about it, because we'd come back and it'd probably take us another week to recover physically. And so is it better physically to do it at home or do it in the same time zone? I'd say 100% yes. But again, the clubs, if they're going to drag in the money that they get in, they have to kind of play the game a little bit. And so it's a difficult one. I used to sit there and you could see the frustrations on Sir Alex Ferguson's face sometimes when it would be finishing a training session and he'd be dragged from pillar to post and the players are going, he'd say, where's everyone going to? There's no one at the hotel, everyone's out doing a commercial appearance. And it's weird, because when you're at a club with a manager for so long, everything kind of runs on autopilot. And when David Moyes came, I remember seeing him when he first signed. I wish I could have brought a picture of him when he first signed to the day when we got on the plane home from the tour, because it was a different fella. He was gone, he was shattered. And I remember getting on the plane and saying, "You all right, boss?" And he was more or less slumped in his chair. Just say, whoa, what has just hit me? Because we were saying before, a kit launch at Everton, with no disrespect to any Everton fans here, was a few pictures on the pitch in the club shop. Well done. But Man United, it was like a world tour. It was, you had to be here, there, everywhere. You got this territory to promote it to. The time zone's different, so we're going to do it this time again for that different time zone. And that's just like one element of it. And they're stacked with different parts. So he had a real good understanding of the difference of the size of the club by the time he got on the plane on the way home, and it was huge, a juggernaut.
David, will you be conferring with Slaven before you dispatch them to America?
Sure. No, we will have a discussion and to decide where we're going and how it's planned. But he is fully aware that there's a commercial reason that we go. If you go 10 years ago, you wouldn't be able to go to America because the cost would outweigh the income, because nobody would, you'd get 5,000 people coming to watch West Ham play, a local American football club. But that's not true anymore, and that's because of globalisation. They want us there. They're excited that we're coming. They're paying more money to encourage us to come. So, you've got the commercial aspect of going. There's also the issue of catch-up. We're playing catch-up. So is Steve, because for years it's been the top 4 or 5 clubs in the country that have been invited, because in the main we're invited to go to these places, and they invite us by offering us money. 10 years ago they'd offer us £20, and now they might offer us 2 million. So things are changing, and that's what's driving us to go. 1, we want to catch up. 2, we don't want to fall behind. So that's what's driving it. It's the financial side, and of course, yes, Slaven will be considering the players' welfare, and we'll be considering the benefits of the commercial value of it all.
Would you, Steve? Would you ever let a manager say, "No, I'm not prepared to do this"?
I think we probably would, but I mean, when you go back to Manchester United, I often think that about these guys. I mean, what champions they were. It's all very well. You've got the money, you've got all that stuff, but I mean, I look at someone like Johan. If he plays in the Euros, you'll have 2 weeks really of anything you could describe as a holiday. And for these guys, Asia and all the travel and the time differences, and then they would come back and just win the league again and win the FA Cup. I mean, just incredible, because just because you're a good player, it's no less the strain on you. I mean, we're in a fortunate position in that we can probably pick the perfect tour for us at the moment. So the tour that the manager likes, that we, gets us a little bit of money, gets us some exposure, but the players love and is good for their pre-season. So we did South Africa last year, fantastic. I mean, obviously, if we were fortunate enough and those kind of commercial drivers start to overtake it, then it's a bit more of a balance. But we need all the advantages we can get. So if we have a perfect pre-season and Man United have a different one, not quite so good, then maybe it gives us a tiny bit of that edge back that we haven't got.
We've got time for a couple more, is there? Chap here.
Jay Gambrell from Suppenor. Sorry, the secret's out. The Americans now know everything. I'd be very curious about, we think, the impact of globalization on the adoption of technology and innovation. So what can the English Premier League learn from North American sports leagues and vice versa? And how has that impacted your thinking and your investment in these arenas?
When you say technology, do you mean in terms of sports science or in terms of
Replays and stuff like that.
Oh, do you mean like video technology?
Well, speaking for my own company, of course, since we do virtual ad replacement for pitch side advertising, that's one thing. But there's a lot of other kind of technology innovation around player tracking and a lot of other things used both for coaching and for fan engagement, as well as brand communications, sort of these things. And you tend to, perhaps inappropriately, you tend to think of the U.S., at least the top 3 or 4 leagues, a lot of innovation, a lot of investment in technology, where Europe tends to outshine them when it comes to sponsorship, exploitation, badges on shirts, and these sorts of things. I'm just wondering what we're learning from each other, especially with Steve, since you've got a foot in both camps, or at least one of your investors has a foot in both camps.
So I think, in terms of technology then, I suppose in sports science, Rio, you would have been the first of the Prozone generation where you would have been told exactly how far you'd run during a game. What were your Prozone stats like?
What it was is it didn't enable a player to cheat anymore.
Right.
And we had a lot of them in training. In matches, not so much, but in training, you had a lot of people who could just go through training and just jog through it. And obviously the sports science department then had a live feed of how fast you ran, accelerations, decelerations, everything you could imagine. And it was weird. It was like walking into a lab. But so when you first started, as I said to you before, it wasn't anything to do with sports science. A quick warm up. Julian Dix used to go out on a training field and just smash balls in the back of the net and start training. No warm up. Now it's a warm up. Or before the warm up, even you walk into the training centre. You go into almost like a lab, and you've got to do a urine sample. You've got to do a spit test. And then we go on a few wellbeing machines, and then the sports science guy comes up and says, "I don't think you should train today. I think you're at that level. If you teeter over the edge, you won't be fit for Saturday. Have a rest day." And to be honest, most of the players, the club I was at, was like, "Whoa, no, I need to train. I've got a game in 2 days. If I don't train today, mentally, I'm not going to be ready. So I need to train." And it was like almost like it's technology versus the human body knowing what was best for the player. So it is crazy, and sometimes it makes me feel as an old pro almost, like it's rubbing people cotton wool. Everyone's in cotton wool now, and that kind of hard graft, drilling people, making people feel what it feels like to hurt in training, that don't happen no more. Because all of a sudden you start drilling someone in training, and the sports science fellow bops over, whoa, he's in the red. And you're like, that's where you're meant to be. That's all right. I grew up being in the red a lot of the time in training and feeling sick. And so when you get into a game, you're conditioned, ready. And I just think that this new generation, sometimes the computers are taking away that element of robustness in the player of today.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I'm afraid we are out of time, but it's been really interesting. I'd like to thank our panellists, Rio Ferdinand, David Gold and Steve Parish, and thank you very much.